Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Welcome back to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. In our last two episodes, I got to tell my own story of the ups and downs of motherhood, specifically talking about arriving at the decision to have children, trying to get pregnant, being pregnant, and giving birth to these two little creatures. So if you missed those episodes and this is a topic of interest to you, please go check them out. If you're starting here, for context, I'm currently 6 months postpartum after having my second child, my son, Bellamy. He is 2 days shy of being exactly 2 years younger than his big sister, Reese, who is my firstborn. And for those of you who have been following the It's a Mother series, first and foremost, thank you for holding space for my story. I set out intending this to be one episode on all things motherhood, and each month as I prepped, I really felt like I was doing a huge disservice to what has been the most transformative experience in my life by far by trying to cut it down to one episode. And knowing how many of the members of our community are mothers, and how little I feel like kind of the realities of motherhood are talked about, I didn't want to do that here. And so, for those of you who are not as interested in all things motherhood, I promise this is the last of it, at least for my story. And we do have some exciting episodes coming up to round out 2025. So, last month ended with me bringing my son home from the hospital, what kind of simultaneously feels like a very short and incredibly long 6 months ago. So, what can we say about the postpartum experience? Um, you hear so much about postpartum. Well, I mean, actually, you don't. If you're about to have a baby, maybe you do. But I guess what I can say is like I feel like publicly, like we hear a lot of negative things about postpartum, or it's kind of just pushed under the rug altogether. Um, and I know for me, like in anticipation of having my children, like I feel like the thing you hear the most about is postpartum depression. And like that's the big scary thing. That was certainly like my biggest fear. And, right, hear that, knocking on wood, as I say that, because I'm very much still postpartum. But I have been very fortunate not to have struggled with postpartum depression, though I know other mothers who have. So I won't speak to that because I can't speak to it. But that is very real. So there's a lot to say, and I think like an easy, tangible thing to talk about is like kind of like the literal like recovery. And preparing for the first go rounds, like I feel like that's honestly where I focused a lot of my like research and energy was like trying to understand what recovery was going to look like because I've been very fortunate. I've never had to have surgery. I've never really had any big medical things happen. So like recovery is not something from like a medical thing is not really something I'm familiar with. So, I read all that, try not to do very much for a few weeks. You should really pretty much be staying in bed, resting, taking care of yourself and your child. I was warned there'd be a lot of bleeding, like a lot of bleeding. I was warned kind of about the like sermon hormone surges. I also like read a lot about like the things that no one tells you about, right? And I felt like the one I saw the most was like, oh my God, you're gonna have immense amounts of night sweats. And I didn't have those too bad, but I also kind of had my own experiences of like recovery that did like impact me that I like hadn't read about when I did all this research. And some of it like seems like it might seem minor, but it's not. So like an easy example I have is the way that you smell after you have a child. Um, After the first few days, you start to smell a certain way. And I wouldn't even necessarily say it's a bad smell. It's kind of a bad smell. But you certainly like don't smell anything like you anymore. and it like lingers for quite some time. And I would have never thought that something like not smelling myself would like upset me so much, but it really did. Like it made me feel off. Like it was kind of this like literally in my face, in my nose, like reminder that I wasn't myself. And so, I'll tell that one because I didn't read that one anywhere. And it really bothered me. And that's one I tell people like, you're gonna smell different. Just that might seem like a little thing, but it wasn't to me. Um, My first pregnancy, the physical recovery did feel pretty difficult. I had a decent amount of like physical trauma, and I really found it like incredibly painful, and difficult to walk or even like sit and stand for like about a week, maybe even 2 weeks. And unfortunately, because of some of the issues my daughter had had with her blood, we had to go to the doctor like a lot the first week that she was home just to like make sure, like get her te blood tested and make sure it was resolving itself. And I truly like remember dreading those trips because I could like barely sit or walk. And I remember like literally my husband like walking at a very regular pace and I'm like 10, 15, 20 feet behind him because I could barely move. And so it was like getting in the car, ouch, horrible. I drive a Jeep Wrangler, so also like physically getting in that car was horrible. And then like waddling and shuffling from the car to the desk, to the waiting room, to the room, sitting on all these hard chairs, and then just getting back in the car and doing that like several times a week, was horrible. Also like we were staying at my parents' house and like the bedrooms were on a different floor than like the kitchen. And so just like it was not pleasant. I was in a lot of discomfort and pain and made everything really hard for like those first couple of weeks. But really, as you're supposed to, I spent a majority of my time in bed. I watched TV. I was comfy. If I was laying down, life was good enough. For Bellamy, the birth had been so physically easy since he kind of just came out without anyone knowing it. Um, I really postpartum, like physically, did not feel like I had had a baby. Like I honestly felt incredibly and had to kind of really like remind myself I'd had a baby and that like my body still had experienced trauma, even though it didn't feel like it, and I needed to like watch myself. So I really couldn't believe how good I felt. And I was like loving life. But, as we all know, women aren't allowed to feel good. They're not allowed to have it easy, right? So, sure enough, about 8 days after giving birth, I woke up around 4 one morning to feed him and realized I was experiencing like quite a bit of abdominal pain. It felt really difficult and painful to like go from laying or sitting and then to standing. My abdomen felt like really tender, really weak. And even when I noticed it, as women often do, I almost was like, you know what? It's probably fine. I just had a baby. Like stuff happens, right? Like it's good. And I almost just like fed my son and went back to bed. But I know that my paramedic husband would be really upset if I didn't wake him up to tell him I was having pain. So I woke him up. Great thing about having a paramedic for a husband is they can give you a basic exam, take my blood pressure, that sort of stuff. Nothing was like obviously emergent. So he kind of said, if we want to be safe, we should go to the ER, or if you'd prefer, you can call the doctor when they open. So we kind of compromised and called my OB had like an after hours line. So I spoke with the receptionist and then they relayed the info to the on-call doctor who's then supposed to call you back. But they didn't. And so a few hours passed. And when I hadn't heard by the doctor, when my OB office opened, I went ahead and gave them a call. They had an appointment for later that afternoon. So I scheduled that. But I had several hours to get on Google and start freaking out about what was happening to me. And nothing was getting any better, but it wasn't getting worse. The car ride to the hospital like really kind of concerned me though, because like every little bump, like I felt like I had to brace myself for, otherwise it was an excruciating pain. And so as we're like going to the doctor, I'm like feeling less and less optimistic about what I'm going through. My husband dropped me off in the lobby so I wouldn't have to walk from the parking lot. And now this is just a fun story that he may be a little upset that I shared, but I did ask his permission. Um, Because I feel like it shows like being a paramedic, like he's really good under pressure and he's like really good at hiding his like feelings about this and being a veteran. Um, so I feel like this story, like he was so cool and calm and collected with me, and I feel like tells like how much he was actually freaking out. Um, so I'm waiting in the lobby and I see him walk up, and it's just him. And I couldn't really get the words out of my mouth because I was so like shocked. So I just started like loudly like saying like our son, our son, our son. And he's like so confused. So finally I'm able to get the words out and I'm like, where is our son? Because we had our son with us and he was so worried about me that he had like completely forgot about our sleeping son in the car and left him in there. But don't worry, 2 minutes, he was fine. Now we laugh about it. But like that to say, like even my husband, though trying to keep it cool, was like starting to get very worried about what was happening to me as well. So we go to the doctor. She gives me the exam, asks me these questions, and is like, you have a uterine infection. Like that's what this is, and you have to be admitted to the hospital like right now. And she was like super confused as to how I got an infection because they're really rare, especially for vaginal births. And I also just remember like every single doctor or nurse I saw in the hospital was just like, that's so weird that you got an infection. And I'm like, yeah, so weird. Cool. But thankfully, the OB office was connected to the hospital, so we were able to get like a relatively direct referral. There were some hiccups, but and then we just like had to walk over. They were able to get me a room, but unfortunately, it was like the shittiest room they had. And if this hadn't have been obvious from the state of the room, which it definitely was, it unfortunately was made painfully clear by every single person who entered the medical or entered the room, because every single person made a point of saying, "Oh wow, you got like our worst room. Like this is our worst room. I can't believe they put you in here." And I'm like, dude, it's clearly a horrible room, but like I don't need you to remind me about it every time someone comes in. It was absolutely tiny. There was one like somewhat reclining chair for my husband, and there was barely room to even put our son's stroller in there. And anytime the nurses came in to do anything, like mess with me at all, like we had to move my son and Cody had to get out of the chair. Like otherwise they were legitimately in the way and they would just like stand in the corner. It was horrible. So I was told I was going to need to be there overnight because I needed to get, whatever X doses of IV antibiotics. So I need to be there at least for 24 hours. And one of the antibiotics I was going to get was going to have to be like administered every 20 minutes for a 2-hour period, multiple times. So it became very clear like they were going to be in and out of the room a lot. And as it neared time to like pick up my daughter from daycare, my husband and I had to have a tough conversation. Was he going to stay there with me and Bellamy? Should just Bellamy stay? Who was getting Reese? Who was going to be taking care of our daughter tonight? Cody's very short paternity leave was also over, and he was actually supposed to return to work the next day. So we also didn't know like who's going to get her ready to school and take her and pick her up. Um, it was a lot to process in a really short window, and it was like we have to make these decisions right now. So Cody did decide to ask for the day off, and thankfully his leadership was really supportive, despite him being a brand new employee. Um, and then it was okay. Well, then we don't have to worry about that, but who's staying in the hospital? And honestly, the shittiness of the room was a real factor. It was not going to work for Cody to sleep there. And honestly, we thought Reese would be do better with him home. So, okay, should Bellamy stay? And of course, they're like, oh, yeah, we'll bring a little bassinet for him. But then I'd be on my own. And yes, I have nursing staff and all that sort of stuff, but I was like not in good shape. Like getting up and holding him was really difficult. I'm hooked up to a bunch of wires and meds. And honestly, like again, because of the size of the room, like his bassinet was going to be in the way. There was barely room to even move just with me. He had already been supplementing with bottled donor milk, and we had a good amount of that left over at home. So we made the hard decision to have my husband take him home and care for the kids and then bring him back to the hospital the next day after dropping our daughter off at daycare. It was not an easy decision to make, but like in the moment I felt good about it. Like this was the right decision. But when it was time for them to leave, I like broke down. Like this like gutturally like crying, couldn't breathe. My son was a week old and I was going to be spending the night away from him. Like it cracked my heart wide open and was so painful. But it was the right decision. While difficult, it really did allow me to rest in a way like I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And like not only was I very much still recovering from birth, but now I was sick. I had this infection. Um, so it allowed me to heal so I could go home. I unfortunately ended up having to stay a second night at the hospital, but I was able to make a full recovery and was pretty much near 100% when I returned home the following day. And so, it was really hard being away from my son and from my daughter again and not being home. I just wanted to be home. I had just been in the hospital. But I will say at the same time, the rest did me just like a lot of good. My milk production also peaked while I was there, and I was able to like use that hospital grade pump, like really take advantage of it. And so when I went home, I was, feeling good and optimistic. Um, but speaking of that pump, the biggest challenge for me postpartum, and I feel confident saying this is a huge challenge for most women postpartum, is breastfeeding. Even if you have an amazing milk production and you and your baby are like killing it at breastfeeding, which is rare, it's incredibly challenging. Your body is working overtime. So if you don't know a lot about breastfeeding, let's do some fun facts. Producing breast milk consumes 25% of the body's energy. And for context, your brain only uses 20%. The metabolic energy needed to breastfeed a baby each day is the amount you'd use to walk 7 miles. And breastfeeding burns about 300 to 500 calories a day. So, all this to say, it is literal physical work, a lot of work. And not to mention, like, the commitment and the stakes. Your baby sort of needs to eat every 2 to 3 hours to live. And you may need to breastfeed for 15 minutes to an hour to ensure they get enough. So if you exclusively breastfed for a year, you would spend about 1,800 hours breastfeeding, which is nearly equivalent to working a full-time job. And if you're struggling to breastfeed, you may be feeding longer or triple feeding, adding pumping and bottle feeding. Long story short, your time and your body are consumed by feeding this tiny creature. And when you're breastfeeding, you're like physically trapped. So you can't get up and get other things done. Yes, they have hands-free pumps, but one, you don't really want to do other things while your nipples are being painfully milked. And if you're like me the first go round, you didn't honestly realize you needed special bras for hands-free pumps, whatever. Get those in your Amazon box immediately if you're about to have a baby. But if you're struggling, whether that's struggling to reduce milk or experiencing pain or mastitis or dealing with like tongue ties, or you and your baby just don't seem to be like getting it, it's a lot harder. And while there are certainly things that you can do to like that can help or hurt your milk production, you're not really in control. Some women just produce a lot of milk, others produce very little, some produce none at all. And despite not being in control of this, you feel like it's your fault or a personal failing of some kind. And you can also feel completely touched out. You're constantly being touched by your baby or a pump, and sometimes you just want to crawl out of your skin, punch your husband in the face when he tries to hold your hand, you name it. You're tired and overwhelmed in every way possible. And for me, I already mentioned some of this with both of my babies. From day one or two, the breastfeeding experience came with extra pressure. They were sick to some degree, food was the cure, and I wasn't feeding them enough to be enough on its own. It had also been beaten into me by my doctors that when you have gestational diabetes, like I did with both pregnancies, breastfeeding helps reduce the likelihood that both you and your baby will develop diabetes later in life. So the breastfeeding stakes felt very high in every sense of the word. And I felt like a failure. And I didn't feel like my husband or anyone else could understand the guilt I was feeling. So I also felt alone in those feelings. There are these people who like will respond to you and they say, it's not your fault. Fed is best. Just introduce formula. And yes, they're right. But sometimes it feels like they're kind of like invalidating your feelings. Like, yeah, I know it's not my fault. I know that I can introduce formula, but I still feel like an absolute failure who's incapable of feeding my child. And they hear you talk about the challenges. They see yourself killing, or they see you killing yourself over this, and they want you to kind of like give yourself a break. It'll be easier if you just introduce formula. Like I understood that. But in that moment, for me, introducing formula felt like admitting I had failed. And it some degree felt like admitting I couldn't protect my child. I really think part of this is just that innate, like evolutionary biological thing. Our body knows that it's supposed to feed our baby, so we feel like that's what we have to do. And then the other part is, of course, societal pressure. Fed is best, but breast is better. I had so many people who I know and love and who I know support me who made kind of like the face when they learned I was no longer breastfeeding at like 3 or 4 months. Some would be like, why? And others could tell, you could tell they like wanted to ask why I'd made that choice. And there was judgment attached to it, whether they realized that or not. And you felt like you have to justify the choice, which is ridiculous, but it's how a lot of women feel. So you want to know the facts? Less than 50% of babies are exclusively breastfed for the first 3 months. And that number drops to less than 30% exclusively breastfed at 6 months. So, you know what that tells me? This tells me that most moms are making the choice or having it made for them to not breastfeed, stop breastfeeding, or supplement breastfeeding way earlier than society makes us believe. So, why do we care so much what other people think about us, especially for something so personal and intimate? And why do we feel entitled to this information about other people and to judge them for their choices? Well, honestly, I think since this is related to women's health, that's our answer. But it's baloney. And it's not okay. Because women are honestly suffering in silence and suffering when they're kind of most in a very vulnerable state. And we should all really care about that. So for me, you've already heard that both my children had to be triple fed in earlier episodes while they were still in the hospital. So that meant we were breastfeeding, I was pumping, and they were drinking my milk as well as donor milk out of the bottle from day one. And it was not my choice. It was made for me. And that's the other part I want to make sure is heard. What a woman chooses to do regarding breastfeeding is her choice and nobody's business, period. But I also want people to understand that sometimes the choice is made for them and they may not be happy about it. In fact, they may have a lot of negative and personal feelings about it. And you're not entitled to any of that. So that choice was made for me. First go round with Reese, we really tried to make it work. I truly felt like I was constantly breastfeeding, pumping, or bottle feeding her. I pumped so much for the first 2 months of her life. It blows my mind to think back on it. Like, how was I sleeping or getting anything else done? I probably wasn't. And of course, I wasn't feeling great mentally. Like pumping sucks. It's the worst. If you've seen memes and videos about like throwing your pump off a cliff, smashing it to bits, lighting it on fire, like those are real. That's based in reality. And no one wants to watch you pump. I didn't have a low key one, you know. I had like Madonna boobs, and if I wasn't wearing a cover, you could see my nips. And so I also felt like I couldn't always like go and be where I wanted if I wasn't comfortable like feeding or pumping in a certain place or around certain people. So like there's also like a physical isolation um that happens. Monitoring your output levels drives you insane. And every time it felt like it was less than I hoped, I felt defeated and horrible about myself. And I felt helpless because I didn't know like what to do about it. So I would just pump more or for longer and hate every minute of it. So I knew going into the second time, like I wasn't going to do that again. Like I would pump enough to keep my production up, but I wouldn't go back there. And that's what I did. And it greatly helped my mental health. But honestly, when I had production issues, I couldn't help but wonder if like it was because I wasn't pumping as much as I had the first time, even though I had production issues then too. And like blaming myself for not wanting to pump. And again, it kind of felt like it was my fault this was happening and I wasn't doing enough to try and feed my child. So that's pumping. But as the actual breastfeeding experience goes, my daughter and I just really couldn't find our rhythm together. It was hard, and I still don't really know why it was so hard for us. I constantly worried she wasn't getting enough food. Neither one of us seemed to enjoy it all that much. You know, I had hoped I'd feel that like closeness, that connection that they tell you about, but I never did. Instead, I often felt frustrated, sad, or even angry. Then came the painful things, the sore and cracked nipples, clogged ducts. And while there are things you can do to help, you're also told like just feed through it. Just feed through it. Your nipple's bleeding. Don't worry, mama. It's not a big deal. Like, what? Just feed through it. You got this. But it's painful. And the pain became so much that I was dreading feedings and they became traumatic. It would hurt, I would react, it would set my daughter off. She was crying, I was crying. I just wanted it all to stop. I remember the doctor suggesting we consider introducing formula, and my husband really wanted us to try it. He could see how much pain I was in, physically, mentally, and emotionally. But even then, I still felt like I needed to try and work through it. Eventually, around 2 months, I made the decision to introduce formula, supplementing with formula. And it's honestly made me incredibly sad. I felt like I was admitting failure. But if you hear nothing else from this episode, I hope you hear that as soon as I gave her that first formula bottle, she sucked it right up. I felt the biggest wave of relief wash over my entire being. This was okay. I was feeding my baby. She was happy. I was happy. And that's all that should matter. I did continue to pump and supplement her formula feedings with breast milk until like about 5 months old. I look back on that wondering why I did it for so long. For almost a month, I was barely producing and pumping enough to give her a bottle a day. And it would take me like multiple pumping sessions every day. And so it still, I still had that like physical, emotional, mentally like taxing component. But I felt like I still needed to get her food from my body. When I made the decision to stop pumping, I felt free. So with my son, I told myself I would not have these same like emotional hangups. Like if I felt like it was too much, I was just going to introduce formula. I would stop breastfeeding, stop pumping, whatever I felt like I needed. And yet, while I could say it was a better experience than the first time, I was not immune from the guilt or from that feeling that I had to like kill myself to get a milk and feeling like a failure when I was struggling. My son had some issues breastfeeding as well. He had tongue ties, which makes it harder for them to latch, and it can create more pain for you. But we did find a good rhythm, and I was having a much better production than I had with Reese, and those like first 6 weeks especially. Despite experiencing some challenges, I was feeling really good about breastfeeding with my son. I was feeling those like close connected vibes during feedings, and I was like really proud of and pleased with my production. I felt like I was killing it. Like I even ordered a box of milk storage bags to start freezing extra milk. But at my son's 6 week doctor's appointment, they said he was not gaining enough weight. And if we couldn't get him back on course in the next 2 weeks, he was in trouble. He had recently begun sleeping through the night, which was at the time another thing we had celebrated, only to have the doctor tell us that that was likely because he was too awake or too weak to be awake for too long, which completely broke me. Like, this was my fault. How could I have been so dumb not to notice he was starving? And worse, to think like we were killing it at feeding. And of course, I'm exaggerating a little because that's how I heard all of this. It wasn't like he needed to be admitted to the hospital or anything. They just said, we had to introduce formula like that day. He needed to gain weight and gain it fast. So the formula decision was made for us. I was embarrassed and ashamed. But again, I felt relief when we introduced that first formula bottle. But I did continue to breastfeed and I continued to pump. But as formula was introduced, I got lazy. And yes, I use that word because that's how I felt. So my production suffered and I felt guilty. And so I started working to get it back, taking different supplements, feeding and pumping more. And I did this for about another 6 weeks, but nothing really worked. My production was crap. And at that point, he was getting most of his food from formula despite my best efforts. So a few weeks before my return from maternity leave, I went ahead and just made the decision to wean and be done with breastfeeding and pumping. And I felt really great about this decision and much more confident in it than I had with my daughter. But I still felt and feel like I have to justify it to people or that people are judging me for quitting. All this to say that breastfeeding is incredibly hard. So ask the moms in your life how they're doing. Please don't feel entitled to knowing about their breastfeeding journey. Don't judge them and don't make them feel like they need to explain themselves. Trust me, most of us are already doing all of that in our heads. We don't need it from anybody else. I also want to address body image issues because body image is a huge issue for women, period, but it is so extra when you're postpartum. When you're pregnant and postpartum, like if you're on social media, your feed is absolutely inundated with all of these ads for like shakes and pills and workout routines, all with this language about like lose that baby weight or bouncing back after birth. And it's honestly pretty harmful. Women, already have so much thrown at them about beauty standards that are negatively impacting our body image and our mental health. And when we're postpartum, like we grew a human being. Our bodies did this superhuman thing, and the changes it had to undergo to do this are like phenomenal. They're huge. Our bodies were taxed in every way, and they continue to be postpartum. It doesn't end after birth. It can take up to a year after giving birth for our hormones to regulate. If you're breastfeeding, your body's going through even more. Like, not to mention that, like, our body is literally healing. The placenta leaves a wound inside you the size of a dinner plate. And if you've had a C-section, the surgeon is cutting through 7 layers of your tissue. It's so traumatic to the body that OBGYNs recommend waiting a full year and a half after a C-section to even try and get pregnant again. And then postpartum, you're also pretty focused on like trying to keep your kid alive, figure out how to be a good parent, and even like figure out what it means to be you now. So this whole bounce back culture and rhetoric is honestly offensive. Like, leave us alone. For me, I had a kind of weird experience because in both my pregnancies, because I was so sick in my first trimesters, I ended up losing weight. So when I gave birth, I actually ended up being like 10 to 15 pounds lighter than before when I had got pregnant. And I certainly felt like I had earned that weight loss with my suffering. Um, but after I gave birth to my daughter, my relationship with food was really messed up because I had the 3 months of having no appetite and nausea and throwing up. And then, like, had a very short window where I got to enjoy food before I got my gestational diabetes diagnosis and had to have a really restrictive diet. So, when I was done with that, I just like shoved everything in my face, like, whatever I wanted, I was eating it. Breastfeeding also makes you really hungry, so you're eating a lot. I also wasn't very active because I'm healing. So, I gained all the way back and then some. And like while I had felt like during absolute trash during my first trimester, I'm not gonna lie, I did enjoy my body a lot more after I lost those 15 pounds. And I ended up being one of those people that everyone hates who carries their pregnancy like pretty small despite not being a small person. Like to the point where even in my third trimester, I had people being like, "No, you were pregnant," which like kind of bummed me out because honestly, being pregnant was like the one of the first times, not the first time, but one of the first times that I like really loved my body and felt like really empowered. And I know a lot of women feel the complete opposite during pregnancy, but that's how I felt. And so like I wanted people to like notice and tell me how beautiful I was because that's how I was feeling. And it was a rare feeling for me. So like honestly, postpartum, like I kind of was like immediately postpartum, I was kind of like loving my body. I've always struggled with weight, and so when I like thought about getting pregnant, it made me nervous because I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna gain so much weight, and I'm, gonna have even harder time like getting it off after I give birth. So like I wanted to capitalize on the fact that I had actually like lost this weight, and so when I gained it all back and then some, I was like really angry at myself. But at the same time, I was also very much in awe of what my body had done. So while I was frustrated, I also was able to kind of more quickly accept my body for like the beautiful mess that it was because it had created this beautiful life. So when I got pregnant again, I had a similarly devastating first trimester, significant weight loss. So I told myself, I am not going to overly restrict myself postpartum, but I want to be more conscious of what I'm putting in my body. Also, I kind of was worried I may have been pre-diabetic between my pregnancies. And so I wanted to be like health conscious. I wanted to be more active. when you have kids, it can be easy. It's not easy, but it can be easy to kind of reframe how you think about your own health. Like you want to be healthy for them, to be around, to be active. So it's a little extra motivation. So the second time around, I was a lot more mindful of my diet without feeling kind of like overly restrictive, and I made a lot more efforts to be active. And even then, I still gained a decent amount of weight back, but not quite as much. And I was a lot quicker to extend myself and my body grace and kind of celebrate the beauty. This body had created two beautiful human beings. But the reality is that there are still plenty of days where I'm getting dressed or I see myself in a picture or in the mirror. And like my first instinct is to be like, ugh, ugh, gross. So that battle is real. And if I can encourage women out there to do anything, it would be to extend yourself grace, cut yourself a break, and try to find the beauty in your body because not everybody's body can do the incredible thing that yours did. And that's pretty awesome. So, what else is going on in postpartum? In my prep, I'd read a lot about sleep issues and I felt prepared to experience that. Um, but I felt less prepared on how to manage it. Like what do I do to like help them sleep? And in those first few weeks or even months, no matter how your baby sleeps or how you're feeding them, you're up a lot through the night for feeding and changing. Just facts. And the moms are usually up more, especially if they're breastfeeding or pumping. Guys don't produce milk, unfortunately. So you're very sleepy when you have a newborn. I feel like this is when I really learned the difference between being tired and being sleepy. I feel tired a lot of the time. Heck, most working adults do, but I'm rarely sleepy. In fact, since I was a kid, I've always had trouble falling asleep. I can't tell you how many times in the newborn stage, though, I have like fallen asleep within minutes or even seconds of closing my eyes, or even fallen asleep while sitting up, holding, or even feeding my baby. And we're not supposed to talk about those last two because you get judged for them, but it's real. We're exhausted. It's not like we're planning it. So you're sleepy. And if you're working or parenting other kids, you're tired and you're sleepy. But I will say we've been lucky with our kids, both of our kids and their sleeping habits. Knock on wood again. Within a few months, they were both mostly sleeping through the night. And by 5 months, they were both sleeping in their own rooms. My daughter loves to sleep. She's easy to put down. She stays asleep. Knock on wood. She's actually harder to wake up than to put down. And it was only a few months ago that she started the typical toddler routine of trying to delay bedtime or wanting us to stay until she fell asleep. Conveniently, right around the time her brother was born. So that was unfortunate. Bellamy also seems to really enjoy sleeping. He was sleeping through the night before I came back to work at 3 months, and he's been doing great in his own room. But I have heard so many parents who haven't had it that easy, who have 8-month-olds who are still waking up multiple times a night or facing major sleep regressions. And normally these regressions hit at the worst possible times. And there are all these different techniques for how to get your kids to sleep through the night. I had a lot more hang-ups about it the first time than the second time. Like, were we comfortable ferberizing her? Like, literally letting her cry herself to sleep. We didn't think we were, so we followed our doctor's recommendation to like wait 15 minutes, let them cry it out, then go in, not to touch them or talk to them. Oh, say not to pick them up or talk to them. You can touch them. And it's hard. Your little mama and daddy hearts like want to wrap them in your arms, tell them it's okay. But also when you hear that crying at 2 a.m. and you're dead asleep and their room is upstairs, you're also like pleading with the gods that they fall back asleep in the next 15 minutes. It's hard, and every parent has to decide what's right for them and their child. And similarly, like to the breastfeeding thing, we shouldn't judge people for doing it differently than we do, and we shouldn't assume people want our advice or opinions. I have never experienced as much unsolicited advice as I have when it comes to pregnancy and parenting. Like, thanks, Karen, but I don't need to hear how you think I should fertilize my kid because it worked for your daughter 23 years ago. I honestly don't care, and I didn't fucking ask either. But yeah, sleep is a whole thing. Being away from work was also hard, but not as hard as I expected it to be. Being a member of this community myself, my identity and my purpose are very wrapped up in my job. And I'm also a recovering control freak. So I was not looking forward to being away from work for 3 months. And yes, I often played through all the terrible things that could happen while I was gone. I also really believed I'd miss the work and the purpose I got from it. And I will tell you, I still love my job as much as I did before having children. But man, did I find it incredibly easy to not think about work while I was home with my beautiful babies. And I will say that's probably testament to having an incredible team who wanted me to be present in my maternity leave and made sure to only reach out when absolutely necessary, which wasn't often. So it became pretty easy to not think about work, and so much so that when I returned to work was like approaching that first time, I honestly fell into a depression. And it wasn't about the job or even concern about balancing everything, though that did scare me too. I truly did not understand how it was quote unquote normal that for the rest of my life I would spend time with my daughter briefly in the morning, evening, and on the weekends. And that, of course, didn't include her older years when she would inevitably have like activities and friends that would cut even more into that time. 90% of the time you spend with your kids across their lifetime is when they're under 18, with 75% of that time happening in the first 12 years of their life. Those statistics break my heart. And in those last 2 weeks of my first maternity leave, I couldn't understand how this was okay. There was definitely part of me that was like, I'll just quit my job. I'll be stay-at-home mom. Like, this can't be it. I need more time. I was so sad. And simultaneously was trying to be like present and soak up every moment, which was hard. How had I allowed myself to spend the last like almost 3 months like not realizing this was it, that this was everything? I hadn't been present enough. I hadn't enjoyed it enough. I needed more time. At the same time, my as I was getting ready to go back to work, my husband felt very strongly that we should move into our new home. We'd been living at my parents' and having our newly purchased home renovated. So the renovations had just finished and my husband really wanted to get us moved in, which like I understood and I couldn't really figure out how to tell him that I didn't want to do that because that was like time and energy away from my baby and I needed to be focused on her. And I'm not much for regrets, and it did feel good to get into our house before I went back to work, but I do wish I could have been more present in those last 2 weeks, really in the whole 3 months. So when I had my son, I was honestly looking forward to maternity leave, and I had every intention of being present and finding joy in every moment of it. And I do think I succeeded in that. Where with my daughter, I was able to like pretty much unplug, and I think I was present. I didn't know what it would feel like for it to end, for our time together to shrink, to take her to daycare and return to work. But with my son, I did. So I was able to be present in a way with my son, honestly, even with my daughter, with my husband, with myself, in a way that I wasn't capable of the first time. When I felt like I needed to be productive and wanted to set my son down, I remembered how much I'd missed my daughter. I'd missed my daughter sleeping on me. I'd kind of check in and ask myself, like, do those things really need to be done, or am I just feeling lazy? And if I was feeling lazy, I'd remind myself that resting and holding my child were not lazy person behaviors. They were exactly what I should be doing on maternity leave. I did a lot more for myself. I spent time outside, swimming laps, sitting by the pool. I did more things that I knew would fill my cup. I was also in a very different situation at work for my second child. I was now the program director. I had 6 people direct reporting to me. And oh, of course, UT's performance appraisal period was while I was on maternity leave. So I had work I had to do. Signing off on timesheets, admin stuff. We had grants. So I worked. Our organization was in a different place. It needed more of me. I knew that going in. So I did a lot more than my first time, than my first maternity leave when it came to work. But my team was still so respectful and it never felt like too much for me. And in fact, when I returned to work, it kind of weirdly felt like I hadn't like really left. Like I didn't have as much of a hard transition. I didn't feel like I was catching up as much. And that helped me a lot. But hear me out. I'm definitely not suggesting that people work on their maternity leave. It's just something that I did a little bit differently from time 1 to 2 that helped me. And one final thing I did for myself the second time around was I enrolled my kid in daycare a week before I returned to work. With my daughter, I would have never thought to do that because I wanted as much time with her as possible. I also didn't know that daycares had 2-year waiting lists, and I waited until my daughter was almost 2 months old before looking for daycare. So she started about as early as we were able to get her in. But that also meant that I was grieving my daughter starting daycare at the same time that I was grieving maternity leave ending, at the same time that I was returning to work and having anxiety about that, at the same time I was trying to figure out how to balance being a working mom. And it was a lot. So I sent Belle to daycare a week early. And while he was there, I spent time alone doing things for myself. I spent time with my husband, focusing on our relationship. I also got to kind of trial run my new routine, like getting them off to daycare, getting myself ready as if I was going to work, feeding the dogs. And then I just didn't have to do anything after that. Um, and so if I was running late, it didn't matter. Nothing bad was happening. And I was really glad that I did this. Um, do I wish that I could have done that and also gotten to spend the week with my son? Of course. But for me, having that week that I didn't have the first time was really helpful. Another thing I really want to talk about is asking for and accepting help and setting boundaries with people in your life when you're in the postpartum period. I remember in the breastfeeding class I took before giving birth the first time, we spent a good amount of time talking about like setting boundaries with people in those first few weeks and months. Our instructor talked a lot about protecting time with you and your baby and your family, the importance of skin to skin, which requires being topless, as does breastfeeding. And so I really hadn't thought about any of that. I was so excited for everyone to come and meet the baby, support me and my husband, that I hadn't really considered the possible like downside of visitors and the importance of protecting like alone and family time. And I'll start by saying I'm very lucky. I have an incredible support system. My parents and my brother and my sister-in-law live in the same city as us. We're all very close. My mother-in-law is only a few hours drive. Our nephew and sister-in-law are local. And I have a really close group of friends, most of which I've known since kindergarten, who all still live in Central Texas. I have great friends from social work school who live in Austin. And I, of course, have this community, who includes my team, our incredible peer leaders, who were all so supportive of me and my family during this time. And I'm very aware that many people don't have this support. And I truly can't imagine how challenging this must be because it's all challenging with support. So when Reese was born, I honestly had 7 friends and family members in the waiting room cheering us on who couldn't wait to meet her. They brought us food, they picked up clothes, anything we needed since we did have to stay in the hospital longer than we anticipated. They started a meal train and frequent offers. How can we help? What can we do? I was very nervous about how soon after the birth Cody had to return to work, so my parents spent every night at the house that he was gone. Every morning that he went to work, my dad came over with a chai latte, breakfast tacos in hand, fed the dogs for me. They did laundry, dishes, made me dinner. I felt so supported. I also really did want to see my friends and have them meet my girl. So while it was a little exhausting having people over in those early weeks, it also felt good. Honestly, the most stressful part was any type of planning that was expected of me. The meal train, perfect example. Incredible in theory, but in reality, it was a bunch of people like constantly asking me what I wanted to eat, when they could bring food by, and I felt like I was having to constantly make decisions, and plan around like people dropping things at the house. I also felt like if they were dropping food off, then like it was the nice thing to do to invite them in and spend time with them. And it became really stressful. And also, I would feel guilty because like they were helping me and I should be grateful. So the second time around, I told people like just bring us food, text that you're dropping it on the porch and leave, or Venmo us. Like, I love you, thank you, but it's got to be this way. It was also stressful, like planning pumping and feeding around people's visits. And so at some point, I just decided I don't care if people watch me pump. But feeding, I felt like I did want to keep that private, because it was a stressful experience with Reese, and I was more stressed if people were watching me. So sometimes that meant I was in a room by myself with my daughter, like while people were over, or telling them they needed to leave, and I didn't like that. It just put more stress on the whole situation. Or worse, on the rare occasion, someone would just kind of like walk in and find me breastfeeding or letting Reese have a contact nap and like try to talk to me or want to hold Reese. And I'd feel like I couldn't say no or ask them to leave, and that made me uncomfortable. I also honestly sometimes felt weird when my parents were staying with us because we were living in their home, and I hated that they were sleeping in a guest room in their own home. And I know they didn't care, but they're the feelings I had. We also had my mother-in-law stay with us a couple times, and while on the one hand it was nice having people there, I didn't feel I didn't like feeling like I couldn't be alone with my baby. Like I felt like I was hosting, and I was in no position to be hosting. The second time around, Cody and I agreed that we couldn't host people at our house overnight. We needed to at least have some time to ourselves, and that helped a lot. We we honestly invited people over a lot less than we had the first time to protect our alone time and our family time. And when we did invite people over, we were really clear about kind of timelines and that at some point we'd be like, hey, you gotta go. We were a lot stricter with our boundaries, and I certainly felt a lot less stress as a result. We were also in our home for kid number two instead of being in my childhood home. And so being in our home was like not only comforting, but exciting. It felt safer. Like, I'm so grateful that we had the ability to be in my parents' home the first time, but it was really, really helpful to be in our home and like making those memories in our home. And there was just so much more comfort, which really helped with kind of my mental health. The one thing that was different with this time was I had a newborn and a toddler, and my husband was working 24-hour shifts. And I was honestly terrified about being alone with both of them. So enter my savior parents. Anytime my husband was on shift, they were available to be with me. They offered to spend the night when he was gone. But honestly, the first time I kind of had learned that like I wanted to be in my home by myself, well, with my children. Um, and that was important. So I spent nights by myself because like for the most part they're sleeping, or at least one of them is sleeping. But they would stay until like my toddler was fed and bathed, and for the first several weeks, like even waiting until I put her to bed. For the first few weeks, my brother picked up my toddler and took her to daycare because honestly, the idea of like getting them both ready and taking her to daycare terrified me in those first few weeks of like I'm still in major recovery mode. I eventually gave it a try, I figured out I could handle it, but it was huge to know that I didn't have to do that right off the bat. And on weekdays, my parents picked her up from daycare, brought her home. On weekends, they were there as long as I needed them. And they did this for over 2 months. And as I got more comfortable, I'd kind of send them home earlier, try an evening or a part of a weekend day on my own here and there. And this was absolutely critical to my survival. Newborns and toddlers are completely unpredictable. Like, yes, they could both be perfect and things could be great and I could totally handle it on my own. But more often than not, and you never know, right, is the point, they could both be horrible. And I'd be having to like try and keep my cool, like wanting to die inside. And I have certainly had those moments on my own. I've had those moments where my son was hungry and screaming his head off, and my toddler's having a tantrum, where I'm breastfeeding my son and my daughter's like physically climbing on my back. Moments where I have to put my son down for a nap to bathe my daughter, only to have him wake up screaming bloody murder. And so, like, even in those moments, like when you're alone, it's hard to find any time for yourself to like shower, go to the bathroom, basic things. And so there were many instances where I felt like I was choosing between my baby and my toddler, and like choosing myself wasn't on the table a lot of the time. And like everything you read is like choose your toddler because your baby won't know any different. Your toddler will. But what am I supposed to do when my toddler needs me while my son is like actively breastfeeding? And now, like, I'm not gonna rip it out, right? And now my central nervous system is like, if I do, then he's crying, and my central nervous system is like freaking out because he's screaming, so I can't like focus on helping my daughter. And it would like literally sometimes like cause me to shut down, and I'd feel like I'm on the verge of a panic attack. It was just like too much. So having my parents there to support was huge. And we this happens now and we do our best because that's what mothers do. We just Do it. Anyways, while the support from my parents was absolutely necessary, there were certainly days when I like straight up did not want anyone in my house. I wanted to be alone, or as alone as I could be with my toddler and my newborn. So I was too often forced to choose between doing what I felt my mind and heart needed, not having anyone in my house, or getting the support with the kids, which I also knew my mind and heart needed. And honestly, I hated how often I felt like I was choosing between those two things. And it's also really hard or complicated, rather, to accept help. We got offered a lot of help, we still do. And I way more often than not find myself saying, like, thank you, but we're good. And sometimes it's truly because it's not needed, but I'd say more often it's because like the offers are ambiguous, which I totally get seems the most helpful, like the I'm here for whatever you need, like tell me what you need sort of thing. But they make it feel like it's just like one more thing for you to plan or you to figure out. And I have layered feelings about everything. Would I love to go on a date with my husband, just the two of us? Yeah. But one, honestly, both of us are sad to lose out on spending time with our kids. So sometimes it's not that we don't want a date night or aren't willing to take people up on the childcare offer. It's simply that we are choosing family. Right now, we're in that place where we're choosing family. Secondly, yes, we both do have anxiety about leaving our kids with anyone, period. We also have four dogs, so that's a factor when anyone's in our home. And it's a lot of work for us to prepare the house, our kids, the sitter, whoever may it be, making the offer, and ourselves for someone else being in our home taking care of our children. And that causes me stress, period. I've read some things where people suggest, like, that if you want to offer help, like, you shouldn't ask how to help, but, like, tell them what you can do. And I'm hesitant about this too, because, like, if someone had texted me and said, like, I'm dropping by in an hour with food, at least the first time going through all of this, I feel like I would have felt obligated to like visit with them. But like maybe if they'd said like I'm dropping by in an hour with food, leaving it on the doorstep, and it's something you can eat now, tomorrow, freeze, etc. Like I think that would have been attractive. Or just telling me like what you'd be able or willing to offer. Like I'm free Saturday if you want someone to come by and watch the kids while you nap or help with chores. And I've had friends do that and I love that, even if I never take them up on it. Like it's just helpful to like it be more specific and optional. Like don't tell me you're doing something that requires my involvement or may actually end up being like unhelpful. And don't ask me what I need. But giving like time specific, task specific options that make it clear I have like the option to not take you up on them guilt free. Mwah. Perfect. And I know that sounds really layered, but the truth is it is. Like in this stage, we're hormonal, sleep deprived, we're coming from a physical, possibly mental, emotional trauma. We're wrecks. We're layered, and we're having a lot of feelings we may not understand about a lot of things. So even offers for help can cause stress. Similarly, advice can come off as judgmental or shaming or even aggressive. Like if I'm complaining about my kid not sleeping through the night, I don't need you to tell me what I should be doing, especially if I'm not asking for your advice. No solicited advice to moms, period. To parents, really. But just because you're also a parent, that doesn't mean that you know what's right for me, my kid, my family. And I didn't ask. I have tried to be so mindful about this when talking to other moms or soon to be moms. I know so much advice can actually end up feeling unhelpful or worse, like kind of be overwhelming and make people feel judged. But I also understand the impulse to like want to give advice, especially if you're kind of ahead of them on the parenting timeline. Like you know how it felt to be where they are, and you kind of are thinking of all those things you'd wish you'd known. But the truth is that even if someone had told you that back then, you may not have found it helpful because like you wouldn't have had the context, and in fact, it may have overwhelmed you or upset you. So I always try to lead with listening, validating, asking questions, and not offering advice unless it's asked for explicitly. And when I'm talking about what's worked for me, I make sure to say it just like that. This has worked for me. When I was struggling with this, I found it helpful to this. And that can go a long way because simply inserting those like I statements lets them know that you have awareness that what worked for you doesn't automatically mean it works for them. It's a delicate dance, but one we like all really need to learn and one that all relationships of any kind would benefit from more practice of this skill. But we should try even harder when the person we're talking to is vulnerable. And while moms are strong as hell, especially postpartum, we are also very vulnerable. All right. So we've talked about a lot of kind of like the physical, emotional, mental things that I was going through and that a lot of people are going through postpartum. But there's another big elephant in the room, and it's time to talk about it. Let's talk finances. Having a kid is expensive. And yeah, while that's obvious, it's still incredibly startling and even crippling when you're like living it and realizing just how expensive it is. And it breaks my heart that so many people from my generation and younger generations are having the decision to not have children made for them because of finances. Like, can you imagine if you didn't exist today, not because your parents didn't want you, but because despite nothing they did wrong, they couldn't afford you? And yes, I definitely understand that this is always the case for many people. Like, it's not a new thing. I know that's my privilege talking, but it's certainly getting worse. It's certainly getting more expensive to live, which means it's a lot more expensive to have children. So there are the medical expenses, everything from prenatal care to delivery, baby care, postpartum, breastfeeding support. I have decent insurance, and the out-of-pocket cost was still like jaw-dropping. And of course, I had the gestational diabetes. I had more appointments, more tests, more copays, more equipment, more medication. Both my son and daughter had to stay in the hospital more than expected and get more treatment. More treatment equals more extra dollars. And then I had the infection with my son, not another jaw-dropping bill. And really, I had no idea the first time around, and nothing was centralized. So like we just started getting bill after bill after bill in the mail, and we'd think, okay, this is it, we paid, or at least we set up the payment plan, and then a new bill would come in. It's a lot, and super ironically, my husband started the new job right as our son was born, and a few weeks after that, was setting up the new insurance, and oh my God, you guys. If we had had a kid on this insurance, we would have paid like $0 out of pocket. Like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Almost enough reason to justify having a third. Not really though, because there are so many more expenses. You have to buy so much stuff that first go round: the crib, the bassinet, bouncer, bathing bath, clothes, hygiene supplies, toys you think you need. And you have no idea what you actually need. So you're like spending all this money hoping you're investing in the right things. I thankfully had an incredible A-type cousin who had already had two, and so she had a literal spreadsheet with feedback on all of the purchases, and I pretty much just like read that, pop things onto my registry from there. Because you want to be prepared, and the last thing you want to find out is that you really need something that you don't have. You want to like make life as easy for yourself as possible before the baby comes. Then there's all the breastfeeding stuff. You have all this equipment you have to invest in, and you don't even know if you're going to be able to breastfeed her for how long. But again, like feeding has to happen immediately, so you need to have all these things: pumps, bottles, nipple sheets, nipple butter, pumping bras, milk storage bags, feeding pillows, blah, 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 blah. Diapers, wipes. There are so many have to haves. And the amount of money we spent the first time, like, still haunts me to this day. And that was even with very generous friends and family members, hand-me-downs, gifting us items. The second go around when it came to that sort of stuff, we were in such a better place. We'd kept things, so we had most of the must-haves. And anything we didn't have, we really knew what we needed and what was worth investing in and what to just not worry about. But even after the initial push, the purchasing never ends. It's kind of weird. Just kids, they just keep growing, they just keep changing, believe it or not. And that means you have to constantly buy them new things, new clothes, new shoes, new developmentally appropriate toys. I literally find myself buying new things for my kids like almost weekly. It's absurd, but also like, of course you are. It's been better for my son because we kept so much. And certainly as my daughter grows out of things, we hold on to them. And you knew that as soon as we found out our son was a boy, my daughter is getting as much gender neutral clothing and items as possible so they can be reused. But I have fully accepted that I'll be purchasing things for my children on a regular basis until they lay me in the grave. And we'll round out the finances portion of this podcast by talking about daycare. Are you actually kidding me? We pay almost as much in daycare as we do for our mortgage. And I know full well that that is very normal, which in turn makes me stick to my stomach. I also had no clue you had to get on daycare waiting lists like the moment you're inseminated or earlier if you can. Normal, right? I'm only kind of kidding. Prepping for my daughter's arrival was so busy with all the things that like must be done before you actually have the baby that I didn't really stop to spend time to think about what I would need like 3 months after she was born. I do remember that the day I told my boss I was pregnant, almost the first words out of her mouth were like, get on the UT daycare waiting list. And she was right about that because I think I was notified they could get my daughter in like when she would have been like 15, 18 months old. It's like, what are you supposed to do until then? And honestly, I didn't even know that until then. And this is the question most families in America have to ask themselves. And I didn't start looking for daycares until like 6 weeks before my return to work. And it all worked out in the end. But like that stressed me out so much. And we ended up going with the only place that had an opening. And thankfully, that has worked out very well for us. They're both attending daycare there now. We're very happy. But searching for a daycare was a nightmare. And it kind of didn't matter where you look, the prices were insane. Like we literally could not afford daycare without my parents' support. And like we're getting closer and closer every day, but it's hard to say that publicly. But I want to say it because I know we're not alone in that. And it's devastating. So kind of round out this portion of the or this the final of the podcast, I wanted to talk about some things that I felt like were really a big shift from one to two kids postpartum. An obvious difference in having a second kid is that you're having a second kid. You now are going from one to two children. And so in some ways that's easier. The first time like you don't know what you're doing, you're learning on the fly every day. Um, with the second, like you know a lot. And while every child's different, you understand the basics and you know to watch like what to watch out for and like how to troubleshoot challenges and it's just a lot easier. What's harder is that they don't and can't have your full attention, the baby, and neither can your toddler, which is the only way they and you have known it. Like you're right. Like you've only ever had to give one child your attention, and so splitting your time and attention is weird. I can't count the number of times I've been in the middle of doing something with one, the other needs me, or worse, is having a full-on breakdown. Um, there's just been too many times where like neither choice, help the toddler, help the baby works, you know? Um, like girlfriend always needed me when I was in the middle of feeding her brother. I'm not gonna just like rip the nip out and say, "Okay, what do you need?" Like it's not gonna happen. And then my baby's crying and I cannot focus. So the split attention, the split love, the split attention, it's not split love. Your heart does double in size and you love them. Your heart grows. So I've heard people wonder about that. Like, oh, I'm gonna now have to split my love. You don't. It doesn't feel that way. But your attention absolutely is split. It is. People constantly need you. The task list never ends. You're constantly being touched. And at least on my end, something I'm dealing with now is like that task list never ending, constantly being needed, just so much more because now there are two of them. Like my brain does not feel my own and I don't know if it's because of that. I don't know if it's because of what's going on hormonally or whatever. But like literally just a few weeks ago I was Googling like, can you develop ADHD postpartum? Um while first time I had like some moments, days, or maybe even a week or two while I didn't kind of feel myself mentally, this time like it's been over 2 months and that started affecting my mental health. Like, is this just my hormones? Will it level off? If so, when? What if it doesn't? Like, I don't have ADHD, so I can't be on meds. Is this just the way I am now? I'm finding myself unfocused or distracted. I'll start 15 tasks and finish none. And like basic tasks, like I'll be in the middle of washing dishes and think like, "Oh shit, I need to start the laundry." And instead of finishing the dishes and then going to start the laundry, I go right then because I'm terrified I'll forget to do it. Because I feel like I'm constantly forgetting things. When I'm feeling really down on myself, I try hard to remember to give myself grace and remind myself that despite all this, I remain very high functioning. But I am a recovering control freak and I'm very A-type, so any departure from like what I'm used to mentally is really scary. And that's where I'm at right now. I do not feel like my brain is my own. I hate it. I wonder if I'll ever get it back or if I need to figure out how to like adapt this new, slower, and for a lack of a better term, dumber brain. So there, you got a taste of a lot of the guilt and shame a lot of moms put on themselves too. We blame ourselves for so much. We're so hard on ourselves. When really the reality is that our body did this absolutely insane thing, and it's pure science that like you're gonna be discombobulated for a period of time, and that some things may be changed for good. And we'll adapt. I'll adapt. I know I will. But in the meantime, this is my internal battle. I find myself in my head saying things like, "Stop being so stupid and forgetful and distracted, Hannah. You're letting everyone down." That's a lot. There are just more needs, more tasks. And while I know it's just a phase, I also know that it's always just a phase. There's going to be another phase. So, it's hard. My other big struggle is that my husband is a paramedic and he works 24-hour shifts. So that means I have multiple days a week where it's just me and the kids. And that can be really difficult because I'm also working full time. So sometimes that means I'm getting myself ready, getting the kids ready, feeding the four dogs, dropping the kids at daycare, driving 45 minutes to the office. Sometimes my office days are like 5, 6, 7 meeting days. Doing the hour plus commute back to daycare, picking them up, getting us home, feeding the dogs, feeding the kids, feeding myself, bathing the kids, getting them to bed, tidying the house, getting things ready for the next day. And maybe I'll have an hour to myself if I'm lucky, or even alert enough to do anything but crawl into bed. And none of those tasks care how I feel that day. You just have to be a mom. One thing I can say that has helped me on the support side the second time around that I didn't have the first time is I have a lot more mom friends in my life and moms who have babies and toddlers like in a similar age. Um, that is so, so helpful because being a mom, just like any other experience, can really only be understood by the people who have had that experience. And even though like I have tons of moms in my life, there's really something special about having moms who have like same age children or two same age children. Because honestly, if having a second kid has taught me anything, it's that you forget a lot quickly as your kid ages. My kids are only 2 years apart, and I honestly forgot so much about the newborn and infant stage. Like they're constantly changing. The world they live it, you live in, and they operate within is constantly changing. So while it's absolutely still helpful and incredibly lovely to talk to moms who have like different age children, it's not the same and it's, not always as relevant or as helpful as you'd hope it'd be. So having more mom friends who like kind of were in the trenches with me, who are living in the same city as me, made me feel more understood, more seen, more supported. And I do everything in my power in turn to like give that all back to them and other moms or soon to be moms as well, because I know how important it is. So my message there is connect with it. Find the moms. And sometimes it's weird because like making any new friends if you don't have mom friends is hard as an adult, but it's worth it. Another big takeaway the second time is you understand how precious time is in a whole new way. You remember how short maternity leave felt, how quickly the kids change. And I always think about this Jay Pritchett quote from Modern Family when I think about time in parenting. And I'm going to try really hard not to cry while I read it. Um, he says, the thing about babies, you fall in love with a baby, with the cutest little fat folds. And then, bam, they're gone. But it's okay because in its place is this toddler with the greatest laugh on earth. And I'm going to get emotional because my child is downstairs and I just heard my toddler's laugh, like literally while I read that. Anyway, the greatest laugh on earth. And then one day, the toddler's gone, and in its place is a little kid that asks the most interesting questions you've ever heard. And this keeps going on like that. But you never get the chance to miss any of them because there's always a new kid to take the place of the old until they grow up. And then, in a moment, all those kids you fell in love with walk out the door at the same time. That one messes me up. And it messes up my big, strong Marine Corps husband, too. And also, tangent, I just have to say, if you've just had a kid or had your second kid and there's a show you love that's about parents and children, like Modern Family, I highly encourage you to watch it again. It's like a whole new show, just like how things hit you, just so differently. But anyway, that quote is everything. Time is a thief in general, but especially to parents. And that became painfully clear raising our daughter. And it's no less true the second time around. In some ways, it's even harder because your life's busier. So it's harder to slow down, to be present, but you also know how high the stakes are. So this time, I'm more intentional, as is my husband. We protect time as a family, and oftentimes that means we don't do other things. We might miss out or skip family things, friends things. But like we've talked about this, and for us right now, our family time is everything, and it's our biggest priority. And this also means that kind of when we find ourselves in those moments, like where we're frustrated or angry, stressed, or upset, when we're with our kids, we do our best to kind of like reset and reframe because we know, even though it's sometimes it's hard to think this way, we know that we're going to miss this stuff, even the annoying, frustrating stuff. We will cry when we realize that we held our daughter for the last time as she was screaming and unable to manage her emotions, or when we realize that we were not trapped by our son for the final time. So we do our best to reframe those moments and to treasure them as much as we can, which is something we just like weren't capable of doing in those early months with our daughter because we didn't realize how precious time was and how fast it moved. But all in all, I think the most important thing I've learned through my two postpartum experiences is all about your mindset. Like you do have some control over your mindset. I will say though, especially postpartum, but really any time, being able to kind of control your mindset doesn't necessarily stop those intrusive or destructive thoughts from creeping in. And with hormones surging through your body, like it really can feel like sometimes you're kind of fighting for control of the steering wheel. Like we're all just doing our best. But my advice for what it's worth is where you can see if you can reframe your mindset to something more positive, whatever that means to you. And especially in areas where maybe like you're finding things to be most challenging. For me today, the two most challenging things are the days where I'm on my own, where I have to be a mom, no matter how I'm feeling, and the fact that my brain has not felt my own in almost 2 months. I definitely had one of those nights this week where the moment we got home, my son is screaming his head off, which is very not like him, and screamed his head off for hours. And I could not find the life of me, or for the life of me, like figure out what he was upset about. And then at the same time he's doing that, I have to feed our dogs. One of our dogs just had surgery and has like some kind of like time-consuming aftercare and specific aftercare. I have to feed myself, my toddler. And all the while, he's just screaming his head off. And as I've said, this boy's cries set me off like in ways my daughters never did. I'm in full fight or flight mode. And so my daughter's needing me, and I can't be there for her. And she's a huge empath, so she was starting to become like very emotionally affected by her brother crying. So then when we finally get him to sleep, several hours later, my my daughter just melts down. Just absolutely melts down. And that ended up resulting in the first time she slept in our bed. And I'm so nervous about what I did and how we might pay for that. but I really felt like I had no other option. But even in these moments, I try my best to reframe my thoughts and my anxieties. When I'm on my own with my kids, yes, it's hard. But I also get this like one-on-one time with them that I know a lot of other parents don't get. And so I try to treasure that time where it's just me and them having that bonding time. And while I hate hearing my son cry, and it's incredibly frustrating when he's in those moments where like I set him down, wakes up, instantly starts crying, like has to be held, even then I try to reframe. Like, I'm his safe place. He feels safest in my arms. And yes, that can be inconvenient, but it's also magical and sacred. And there will be a time when I don't get to hold him when he's upset. And I'm sure it will break me into a million pieces. When it comes to my brain, it really does feel like kind of someone else is up there on the steering wheel. And that's really scary to me. Not all the time, but way more than I'd like. And I can't remember if I may have mentioned this in the pregnancy episode, but on my first pregnancy, there was one particular day where I had like this paralyzing case of pregnancy brain. Like I felt really dumb and couldn't function. And I remember it was a work day. And at some point I was writing an email and I was so off that my fingers like literally got off home row and I ended up signing an email JAMMAJ. So now when I don't feel myself, I joke that that's just Jamaj. Jamaj is in control. Jamaj has ADHD and he forgets how to complete basic tasks. This is randomly a tactic that has helped me. Like just like my husband and me like call his PTSD his guy, we call my baby brain Jamaj. And it helps it feel less like I'm the failure. Jamaj is a part of me, and unfortunately a part that I can't fully control. So I extend myself grace there. And it's definitely a work in progress because I will not sugarcoat it. Like, this is really impacting me right now. But it is also a part of the beautiful journey that made me a mother. And so I guess that's where I'll end this. Being a mother is an incredibly difficult journey in every sense of the word difficult. It tests us mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. But it's also the most incredible journey I have ever experienced. It's grown me in ways I could never have imagined possible. It certainly made me a better person, a more empathetic person. And it's made me more empathetic and forgiving to myself. It's helped me reframe all aspects of my life. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about motherhood, parenthood, relationships, career, educational pursuits, you name it, life is hard. And all of us are just trying to do our best. It's all we can do. And we all deserve to give ourselves grace and to extend grace to others because we truly do not know what anyone else is going through. And I feel like that's a lesson we all need to hold close to our hearts right now. In the case of motherhood, just because it's so regular, so common, even as a fellow mother, I should never assume that I understand another mother's experience. And I certainly shouldn't preach to them on what they're doing wrong and what they should be doing. So, my perspective is whether it's a mom in your life or anyone else, just don't assume anything and don't judge anything. Check in on people, ask them how they're doing, ask them about their experiences, and provide them support because we all need it. We are all going through stuff. So let's just be kind to one another. I want to thank you guys so much for, again, just giving me space to share my own story for something that has completely transformed who I am as a human being. And I know for many moms, they feel that way. And I'm just grateful to be able to share my story with you guys. And I'll see you next month. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.